Well, okay, everybody. Hope you had a great lunch and having a wonderful day. I think we're getting ready to start this next session. Entitled How to Scale WordPress Across the University. We have Mark, Tim, Kelsey, and Peter here who will introduce themselves as they go along and explain what's going on for you today. A couple of things to take care of. We all heard about our surveys at the end of each session. If you want to fill one out, there's hard copies and there's digital copies. And please silence your devices so we can interrupt us.
All right.
Long big round of applause.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Great. Glad to see everyone here at this session. First of all, what I'll do is make sure that this is clicking, and this is where you can follow along if any of you want to check out what we're talking about and also see it later. WPC NYU is our team. So here we are, 17. What we'll do is we'll introduce ourselves and give a sense of what it is that we're here to address. And our group is myself. I'm Malik. Call me Mark. I'm Malik, and Peter and I are with NYU IT. Jenny and Kelsey are. Jenny's with Gallatin and Kelsey's with Steinhardt School. Those are two schools here. So what we do at NYU is we work in IT on some of these, on our web publishing instance, what we call web publishing. It's our WordPress instance. And what we're also going to be doing is letting Jenny and Kelsey address how it kind of has worked for them. They have very specific use cases as to how our system has helped them do what they do in their schools at the university, and it's all based on the things that we were able to do in our efforts at scaling. And they'll be introducing themselves a little further in what they do. So, like I said, this is our web publishing at NYU is what we call. Our WordPress at NYU is what we call web publishing. WordPress is the tool that we use. And what's key about it, and the reason why we always have to think about scale, is because when we say university-wide, we don't just mean citywide at NYU. NYU is this, real global institution that's been trying to grow. And I really do mean global. They have this plan for world dominance or something that it's not just New York City, as you can see, it's like every continent. There's even, look at that, where people might be logging in. So there are programs all over. Some of them are actual campuses, but some of them might just be programs somewhere. But we definitely then have to address, how do we give everyone the same experience? And so that's one of our big challenges. And so to talk about this, I just want to say that I guess the way we look at it is scale is not just about tech decisions. At a university, scale is also about business decisions. It's about policy. It's about strategy. It's these other things that you're going to have to address. And in our case, it comes up. I think the challenges we've run into technically are actually, we feel more confident about. We can do that. We figure out what the technical challenges are. But sometimes, you know how it is when you're at a university or in higher ed, sometimes your challenges might even just be getting that office on board, getting the provost, the dean, whatever. These things have to make sense up the ladder, not just to, up the IT department, but in, all the way up in the other people that we have to address and explain things to. So that's some of what we're faced with. And I think one of the big lessons we've learned is not only can you scale up, but you have to keep in mind when it's going to be necessary to scale down. And that's something that we have worked to create this balance with. You always have to be thinking a few steps ahead, like, when do you go up in size, and in what cases do you have opportunities to go down in size? So to do that, we had to, along the way, I'm launching this service, which we did around before fall of 2014. Is to make a few really key decisions. We talked to some other universities even. I know that Duke was instrumental in us figuring out how they do it, but we had to make some different decisions. I think Duke runs on premises. They run on-prem, but we made a decision to be cloud hosted, and that was going to work for our needs. We work with, it's all managed with an outside vendor. And so we have, I guess, resources on hand to be able to have our IT guys work with, speak the language with some other groups that are outside. And so that's been key for us to operate that way. In fact, I'll say that what I'll get to in a little bit is that we had to even do there have been times when maybe groups have had to do maybe a migration, let's say from on-prem to cloud or something like that, which we've done in some of our other services. And we did a cloud to cloud migration, and that was our biggest project last year. So I think I'm going to address that a little later. Our environment is multi-site, which I'm sure a lot of your groups in the room have. So you're able to establish user limitations, which is key because you don't want too much fiddling around in there that you're going to lose track of. What might be different about our implementation than some other groups is that we are just focused on teaching and learning needs, and everyone else kind of comes after that. We can support the needs of the entire university, but our group actually kind of on paper is a group that is focused on teaching and learning. So we tend to make sure that our plugins, our themes, and these things are ones that really suit teaching and learning needs. And you get some requests every now and then for some plugins and themes that might suit another group. Could be HR, it could be some other administrative group, and we have to sort of pare down and say, actually, we're focused on teaching and learning needs here. So one thing is that because of the size of NYU, we've been able to split responsibilities between different teams. I mean, I know I've been at small colleges or something, and maybe it's all on 3 people responsible for the whole instance or something like that. But in our group, we've definitely been able to have the work of what we have as our service and support team. We have a development team. We actually work with a development firm. Hi guys. The development firm is who gives us a lot of support for some of the things we need as well. And we have a help desk that's part of the university. And we also have the work of instructional techs at each school, like Jenny and Kelsey here. And they're able to, make sure that things that need to be understood by different groups are. But really one of the key things, I think, is that our system is driven by a self-service model. And that has been key. And I'll actually give another shout out to someone in the room. Our tech guy is here, Neil. And he was instrumental in building out what we have been able to do. This means that it's not when groups on campus need to set up a website, they don't come to us and email us or anything like that and say, I need to set up a website. They go to the URL and click create. Like go there and say, it's time, I want to create a website. And that goes for anyone. It could be a student. It could be all the way up to a dean. Everyone's going to have the ability to do that. And lastly, as something that a project we've been in lately is being able to automate where possible. And so that's something I'll show you in a second. Our self-service model, like I said, this site setup wizard has been huge. That's probably the biggest deal. We have a few other things that we have in place. We have a customer service. We have a knowledge base with almost maybe more than about 75 articles and it's always growing, that are our own things. It's not just like what you would get over at WordPress Codex. It's specific to our needs. We have Sidekick, and that's another thing that group does. And then of course we direct people to our own Linda. So just as a look through this site setup wizard, it's something that just walks people through. They first pick what kind of site they would have, and then they go on to another screen that's a form that they fill out, and it's really fast. It's actually like if you already know what you're going to set up, then you can get through this form in about 30 seconds. And here's what's key. I want to zoom in here because this is how our users help us scale. By them picking what kind of, how their site is going to work, like let's say they pick, hey, I really only want this visible to NYU, or I want this only to users who I specify. That is key in helping us assess, you know, what we have to do. In our case, we know it's not high traffic necessarily that we're optimizing for. We're actually optimizing for fast performance because we're not Amazon on Prime Day or anything like that, right? Like we don't have to optimize where some professor just has this, you know, really popular site. Actually, we tried, our security guys would give us a flag if that was the case. They would notice something was happening, but instead, what we found is that with that migration project that we did, we knew we had to fix something. And we used to have page load times of about 10.5 seconds with our previous cloud host. And then we got a new cloud host and it went down to 2.5, and some of those guys might be in the room too. And we were able to do that. And what was key to those higher ups that I have to answer to on the business side was that we were able to reduce costs pretty significantly. The other group was giving us slow performance and kind of bleeding us. And it just didn't make sense. And I went to that storytelling session this morning and I could tell this whole thing is in that way. So my group, again, is the service management team. And again, we had to, one of our focuses is sometimes we do a downsizing. We've done it once so far because we've only been having the service for a short amount of time. What that means is, hey, students turn over, alumni, they're gonna become alumni. So then we have to make more so a policy decision. What then happens to their sites? If there are dead sites even, what do we do about those? So that's what our annual downsizing, or maybe every 2 years it could be, but we have to think about that. When we're gonna do themes and plugins, really strict vetting process, universal restrictions. Like I said, this is a provost starting a site. It's gonna have the same privileges as a student starting a site, because they're only able to do certain things. This is all multi-site things, and we are pretty, we don't necessarily, you know, no guarantees. If someone's requesting a plugin, it's not necessarily gonna, has to serve our needs and has to be secure. So we conduct surveys, we analyze metrics. Peter's gonna talk a little bit about that. And we pay attention to these use cases and our, like I said, we're automating, we're in the process right now of doing some serious automation because these things have to do with policy. I'm going fast because we got other folks to go to. We have to establish policies around, like, for instance, what do you do about non-current users, non-current courses, dead sites, all of these things. We can automate updates, you know, whether or not there has to be a theme or plugin removed. We've done some of these projects, and so the key is trying to establish automation so it doesn't all have to be manual. And so these are the, this is the way it's been going, and metrics is really what informs all of this. It's not just about technical configuration, but it's also about our strategy. And so Peter is going to talk a bit about the metrics. Yeah.
Hi there, yeah. My name is Peter Arbaugh, and I work with Malik in our central NYU IT department. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about how we use metrics to operate at the scale that we're currently at. So I think as of yesterday, we had 6,437 sites within our multi-site operation. As mentioned, we do some downsizing, so it's not, so these aren't all necessarily active sites, but that's how many sites we have listed in the database at the moment. And we have about 21,800 users registered currently. So our current metric solution, as many of you probably know, for a system like ours, there's not a whole lot of options available right out of the box. So at the moment, we're using a combination of sort of traditional Google Analytics and in addition to a plugin called WP Network Stats that was actually developed by my predecessor. This plugin is available at the moment, but you might need to do a pull request if you're interested in getting it updated and working currently. Yeah, but we use these two different tools, and I'm going to go through a little bit of the data that we can get from these tools. As we mentioned earlier, clear use cases are very important for a service of our size. And these use cases have allowed us to build a system that continues to grow. And having metrics helps us define and understand those use cases, and also be able to sort of identify and define some possibly emerging use cases. Yeah, so I'm going to run through a couple different dimensions to the data that we're collecting, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about applying those and sort of drilling down within the data. So first question is who? So who are our site owners? At the moment, we know that we have current employees, students, faculty, and then access removed. As I mentioned, we do downsizing. So there's some leftover sites for people who may not be able to access them anymore. We are, however, teaching and learning focused, and you'll notice that we have more employees. However, we're not necessarily worried about that. And there's two reasons. First is that our instructional technologists create a lot of, they create a lot of the websites. I think that at one point, I think actually when this data was pulled, Jenny may have had 400 some sites in the teaching and learning and our portfolio categories. And we also have more data. So we know that we have a lot more teaching and learning and portfolio sites than we actually have administrative sites within the service. So next is, what type of sites do our users have? I don't necessarily have a particularly strenuous quantitative method to get into what types of sites they have, but I was able to look at, so using the WP Network Stats plugin, I was able to look at site titles, and I plugged it into something on the web, and I pulled out a couple words. I think I pulled out NYU and test, and yeah, and we're left with this. So you get a good idea of what's going on. You'll kind of notice that I think we tend to, the majority of our sites are in liberal arts or humanities, and we have some other data which backs that up. You'll notice that Steinhardt and College of Arts and Gallatin, humanities, liberal arts, social sciences is where we have a lot of our sites. School of Professional Studies and Stern School of Business, they're also on there, but with fewer sites. This sort of information, it helps us talk about planning and understanding what tools might be useful for our current user base, what sort of plugins and themes might be helpful, and it can also help us identify shortcomings. You'll notice that we don't have, or we probably have hardly anyone who does a lot of hard math, and one of the reasons we've discovered is that we don't have very good math jacks or LaTeX support within our service, and that's something that we're working on fixing just before the fall term. But that's an observation which is backed up by the data. Right. So we can also look at where, in a more geographical sense. As mentioned earlier, we are a very global university. We're trying to be a very global university, and so you can see sites from some of the different locations. This isn't necessarily accurate 100% because students and faculty move around. A student from Steinhardt may go to Shanghai for a year and they may create 40 sites, but it will not be the way our metrics works. It's not, and I guess in the way the identity management group within IT records this, it's not going to be, they aren't going to be affiliated with Shanghai, but it is helpful to have some idea of who's creating sites. A support ticket from Abu Dhabi or from Shanghai is much more common than, say, one from Prague, and they're all operating in different environments. For example, if we know we have a lot of users in Shanghai, we probably aren't going to introduce something that requires YouTube or something like that. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about, or I guess we can learn a little bit about how web publishing is used by our students and faculty. An interesting piece of information we found is that nearly 15% of our sites were not edited after they were created. We have a creation date, and then there's like the last edit is within, I think I set it to 3 hours after it was created, and then it was never touched again. And this really supports our decision to downsize, and this helps us identify which sites should be removed, because those people probably aren't going to come back for their site after a year or something. So another, I guess, in relation to the question of how it's used, we have 49 themes available for our users at the moment. However, we were able to find out that 56% of our users are all using 8 themes. They're using one of 8 themes. So they're all sort of clustered in the same set of themes. This sort of information can help us focus our resources. This helps us know that we maybe shouldn't spend a whole lot of time providing documentation or support or video walkthroughs or that sort of a thing for a theme which maybe is only used by 60 users throughout, or on 60 sites throughout the whole system. So lastly, we can also talk a little about when web publishing is used. None of this helps. This gives us an idea of when we can make changes and when we can make, when it's good to make pushes for outreach and for workshops and for trainings. However, nothing here is necessarily rocket science. It's pretty much what you'd expect in a university, and it tracks very closely with our calendar. Like, we have a J term, so you can see nothing really picks up till February. But we can quantify those differences, and that can be helpful. Also, with dealing some of the politics and dealing with other departments asking for requests, we can quantify what sort of audience we're serving at the different times of the year and help us schedule. So metrics can also help us answer some very specific questions. I've talked about some very general uses and some very sort of one-dimensional, very basic data, but we can also sort of get into very specific questions. I'm sure some of you are perhaps wondering how many faculty in NYU dentistry have sites within our service, and I can tell you that it's 6. Another question that we also get a lot of feature requests. We have a policy where users can submit requests for features they'd like to see within the system, and we evaluate them a couple times a year. Having the metrics can really help us make our decisions in context. For example, semi-frequently someone will say, we need the paid version of X plugin, of some plugin. And so, for example, if it's our post-voting plugin, that's only activated on less than 8% of sites. That's between 300 and 400 sites, I believe. So that's a very different question. It's a very different ask than one of our gallery plugins, which is at nearly 26% of sites, which is, I think, roughly 1,800 sites at the moment. So having metrics have helped us scale, and it's helped us manage our system at its current scale, but our collection of metrics has not scaled well. Most of what I've shown you today, I came up with in Google Sheets, which isn't ideal when dealing with this much data. It takes a really long time to load. So where do we go from here? We're starting some early conversations about where we'd like to go next with our metrics. One of the things which I've been thinking about is Google Tag Manager, so we can get a little bit more fine-grained detail on some of the Google Analytics type of things we're getting. We'd also like to set up a system to automatically collect data similar to what we're getting from the WP Network Stats plugin we're using, automatically store it in a database, and then we'd be able to access it with probably Tableau, which NYU has been looking at for a while, or RStudio or something along those lines. Big data technology is also something which we're discussing a little bit. This isn't necessarily due to the size of our database, which could be dealt with in R. However, the complexity of joining a lot of tables together, especially if you want to start getting into plugin usage and specifics of plugin usage, that's going to be a huge amount of joins. So we might need something a little bit more robust to deal with that. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jenny to talk about some use cases at Gallatin. Slide down.
Hi, everybody. I am Jenny Kijowski. I'm the educational technologist at Gallatin. And before I talk about how we use WordPress at Gallatin, I thought I would tell you a little bit about what our school is. We are the School of Individualized Study. We offer liberal arts education to both undergraduates and master's students. Our curriculum is interdisciplinary and experiential. It's a blend of academic and artistic. So we don't really have a set curriculum. Our school is unique in the sense that our students develop their own plan of concentration in conjunction with a faculty advisor. So our school is kind of small in the larger scope of NYU. And because it's small, we're able to offer support that's really hands-on, right? So NYU IT has this kind of self-service model. And from there, you know, they kind of hand it off to the educational technologists, instructional technologists. And at Gallatin, we've taken, I call it a hands-on approach. It might even be called hand-holding. So we really do work with the faculty and students on a very intimate basis. So every semester we do a lot of faculty workshops around WordPress in particular. It's our most attended workshop. So there's a lot of interest there. We also do in-class student training if a faculty member is using WordPress in the classroom, and also requires students to generate either their own sites or to create content on the course site. We do in-class trainings. We also do one-on-one consultations with faculty, students, and staff. So there's a lot of administrators who are interested in WordPress. And that's all in-person kinds of support. And we also offer some digital resources in addition to the ones offered by NYU IT. So Gallatin is all about being individualized and customized. So that goes for all the resources that we have to offer our faculty and students as well. So what we do is we take what's already pre-existing and we kind of repackage it into, you know, Gallatin ease, and we kind of make sure that our faculty and students understand how it could work specifically for them. I was going to show you these websites, but now that we've got this thing working with the thing, I'm not going to mess with it. But we have a digital Gallatin website built on WordPress, and it houses everything related to teaching and learning with technology at Gallatin. And on that site, we have a page dedicated to, you know, how do you set up a digital project or a digital site? And we have our various platforms, including WordPress. And we also have, because we've generated now so many WordPress sites, specifically at Gallatin, we've created a directory of WordPress sites. So you can browse by type of site, so administrative, course sites, event sites, whatever. You can browse by discipline. So if I'm teaching a course in literature and I want to see how my fellow colleagues have used WordPress in their literature courses, I can go and check those out. And you can also browse by feature. So if there's a specific plugin that I'm curious about and how other people have used it, I can go and see who else have used it and try to get access to their sites. So yeah, so that's our support model, and it's very hands-on, and it's manageable right now, in spite of the fact that I'm the educational technologist. I have two part-time student workers. Peter used to be one of them, and then NYU IT stole him from me. Which is great for him. But so at the moment it's manageable. I'm not really sure once the program really starts to get going, but we're managing all right. Okay, so I have 3 basic use cases at Gallatin, the first of which is our course sites. So our faculty really wanted an alternative to our LMS, which is built on Sakai. And what they wanted was the ability to create a public-facing site. They also wanted a better blogging platform. If anybody's familiar with Sakai, the blog is not great. And they also wanted something that was, frankly, a little prettier than the standard LMS. There's a lot of faculty who have told me that they feel strongly that their students respond better to online content when it's kind of presented in a non-LMS kind of way. And so what we've done is we've created a templated course site that has opportunities for student engagement through the blogs and various content creation abilities, as well as some granular visibility options. So if you want to make the syllabus private, and the rest of the site public, you can do so. And that template ability, the ability to create templates, has really been key to our ability to scale up at Gallatin itself. So another way that we use WordPress within courses at Gallatin is to create a central course site that then links out to student-generated satellite sites. And those student-generated sites are, again, created out of the template ability, which is a pretty new service, but it's working out really great for us. So that's our course sites. Our second most common use case is our Eportfolio. So this is a brand new program. We're going into our second year. And we've been looking for a way to offer students the ability to both manage and archive and record all the different kinds of learning that they do at Gallatin, but also to be able to share that out in a nice kind of showcasey way, and also to reflect on their learning as they proceed through the program. So designing your own curriculum sounds really great, but when it comes down to actually writing it down their sophomore year, a lot of students get stuck. And so what we've done with our architecture of the template is to really suggest certain kinds of content that we think would be most meaningful to students in the long run. So there's really a focus on reflective learning and kind of engaging with the courses in a retrospective way throughout the semester. And so again, the templates have been really, really critical. Another component of our Eportfolio program is our Gallatin Commons, which is again built on WordPress. It has a directory of all of our ePortfolios and is again a discussion space for our incoming first-year students. Our ePortfolios have probably skewed the metrics because every fall, well, last fall we generated 350 WordPress sites, in a couple of days, and we're going to do that again. A lot of which in our ePortfolio system is not mandatory, so our students are a lot of the students who didn't touch their ePortfolios after it was created, so apologies for that, but it's a program we're trying to get going. And then last but not least, there's everything else, right, that we use WordPress for. So we have a lot of Gallatin assets that we need that are not really appropriate for the Gallatin website, which is really for current students. It's got a lot of policy and course information, and it's also a marketing tool for prospective students. And so there's all these other kinds of Gallatin affiliated websites that are needed that aren't really appropriate for that space. So for instance, we generated this this resource for teaching and advising that's only visible to our faculty and advisors. They can share resources, they can have discussions that students can't see. And we have a bunch of other sites, we have the Gallatin Galleries, which is our digital archive of our physical gallery on the ground floor. We have the Gallatin Greening Committee. So that's a committee made up of students, faculty, staff who are all concerned about sustainability, and using the WordPress, one of the WordPress plugins that allows you to vote up or down ideas. So we're using that for that. We have a bunch of student journals that we're creating right now, and conference websites, events websites. We needed a way to quickly and easily generate websites, and the web publishing team has done a fantastic job of making that a really easy option for us. So, so that's Gallatin's WordPress usage in a nutshell. I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey.
Hello. Hi. Before I get started, by show of hands, can you raise your hand if you are student-facing, faculty-facing, lots of interaction with students and faculty? So not many. So this is going to be kind of new for a lot of people, which you should be very excited about. So I come from Steinhardt. I am a senior academic technologist, and just a little backstory about NYU, and I love this analogy and I use it all the time, but NYU is kind of like federal and state. So we have our federal, which we call central, and these two come from the feds. They're the central IT. And then you have the state level, which is the schools. So that's like Jenny and myself. And just like in the United States, they totally govern themselves. They have their own leadership. They have their own budgets. Everything we do is determined by us. We can adopt new tools if we see that we need to adopt new tools, and sometimes we do. Steinhardt is unique in that there are 11 departments at Steinhardt. So I don't think we could get any further away from what Gallatin is like. Where Gallatin is very individualized, we are very accredited. So we have to hit a lot of state benchmarks. We have to hit a lot of government benchmarks in terms of our curriculum. And so we are broken up into 3 areas: culture, education, and human development. We have 17 research centers, 292 faculty, and a little over 5,000 students. Some of our support: we are a school that also is partnershipped with 2U for our online programming. So that means that when we do roll out ePortfolios or other initiatives that use WordPress, we often use our LMS to support the resources that Central IT offers us in terms of knowledge-based articles and things like that. So when we roll out ePortfolios in a curriculum, we'll always go and make a page in the Sakai learning management system that says this is how you can access your ePortfolio, this is how you can access your resources to build your ePortfolio, things like that. 2U also does the same thing on their platform. We conduct trainings in office hours. Our trainings consist of computer lab trainings, and I'll get to this in a little bit, but I would not overestimate the technological ability of students in college nowadays. They need a lot of hand-holding, and that's totally okay. We can't assume that everyone is tech savvy. At Steinhardt, I would tell you that they absolutely are all over the place. So when we design training opportunities for our student, we really have to keep that in mind. So portfolio. So one of these case studies was this is a occupational therapy. So this portfolio was templated, and templatizing has changed my life, and I think it's changed Jenny's life too. Asking people who are very hands-on, and they're occupational therapists, and they get on the floor with people, and they touch the body, and they do that whole thing, and asking them to log onto WordPress and make a professional portfolio that they're going to use for their dissertation defense, which is then going to be used by the state to evaluate whether or not they hit all these benchmarks, is very overwhelming, and it's very difficult for them to do. And so even with a template, which my office made, we have a kind of a large academic technology office, it still required a tremendous amount of training. And I think it took about 2 months to get it going. It took about 4 or 5 different training sessions to get them totally comfortable with being able to use the WordPress platform. And that was with the template that had open buckets, and all we had to do was just put your content right here. And even that was just so much work, but we got them there. I don't know about next year, but we're there now. Another direction is research. And I know Malik mentioned that at the central level, they're very concerned with just teaching and learning. But at the Steinhardt level, we can't just be concerned with teaching and learning, because we have faculty and we also have researchers, and most of them do both. So when faculty come to us and they say that I have a research lab, which they all do, I need a website, which they all need, we have to be able to support them in building out that area, which is different than the route that Central IT has to take, but we have to accommodate our research centers because we have so many, and there's such a big part of Steinhardt. So this was just a normal template, probably one of the top templates if you look at their metrics. And then just lastly, a course site. So what we do at Steinhardt, and I love Jenny's idea of a template course site, but what we have to do is run them through a process called ADDIE, and that's an instructional design methodology, and it starts with analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. If we give them WordPress and say, go make a course site, they'll never, ever be able to accomplish that without some sort of scaffolded approach. So it usually requires about 8 weeks to get a course site to look like this. And it involves one-on-one time with academic technologists like myself, a lot of analysis, a lot of syllabi, of removing things, of digitizing things, working with the library to find resources that don't necessarily need to be a DVD. We can put them They can find a different video in our library, and it could be a flipped classroom where they watch the video at home and they come into the classroom prepared to apply what they learned in the video. So when we talk about making course sites, it's more than just the actual going in and putting it all together. There's so much analysis and so much design that goes into it beforehand to get to this point, especially at Steinhardt. Okay, we're just in time. So questions. We killed it. Wow. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes.
So, portfolios, how do you assign the faculty that need to review them? Say, each semester, do they get reviewed by certain faculty?
Ours do not.
Repeat the question into the mic.
Oh, you said do the faculty need to review the portfolios at the end of each semester?
Especially like
In terms of curriculum? Yes. Yes.
So how are the faculty assigned to that portfolio?
Well, usually the portfolios are designed at a curriculum level. So I will say this till I'm blue in the face that implementing an e-portfolio will only be successful if it's worked into the curriculum of the program. And if you have a scaffolded approach where students know that every assignment needs to be put into a portfolio, it'll be more successful. Faculty, the way they usually do it is that they evaluate portfolio as it goes along. And then the scaffolds and it builds on program and program, especially with the occupational therapy one that I showed before. That was a 2-year-long portfolio. So by the end of the 2 year, the dissertation defense reviewed the portfolio in its entirety. But I don't know if that's similar to Gallatin's approach.
Ours is a much more informal approach, so we encourage our students to show their portfolios to their faculty advisors to kind of just to kick off a discussion about where they're going to be going and where they've been. But there is no formal system where anybody has to review them, and that's actually part of the reason why we don't have a mandatory portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a follow-up question for either of you, given you work with different student populations, but thinking of e-portfolios. And I'm a professor, I work directly with them. What, just kind of in general, if you're saying, okay, we're going to do this, has been your experience as to the functionalities, the looks, the content that aren't pushing a rock uphill, that your students just automatically say, gosh, I love it, I want to do more of that. I mean, Gallatin being very, very individualized, I bet your students, they'll be resistant students.
Yeah.
You were talking about raising more hands-on kind of
Yeah.
learners.
Yeah.
So accepting those challenges, what's the sweet spot of, let's say, e-portfolios, custom student sites, in your experience?
Is there a way to repeat the question?
We need to do that.
There's no way I'm going to be able to do that.
What works?
What works?
What works?
Easily.
So for us, we're, like I said, entering into our second year, and we're still trying to figure out what works. Because it's not a mandatory program, we have to find different ways to incentivize our students to engage with their e-portfolios. And so one of the things that we're discussing is having an actual 2-credit course that's fully online that will give students the foundational understanding about why e-portfolios will be meaningful to them. And give them the technical training that they'll need to really maximize their sites. This year we also have, there's a handful of students who always take something and really run with it. And we've identified those students. We're going to make them student ambassadors and help promote the service. So that's a good question. We're still trying to figure out what the sweet spot is.
I would say at Steinhardt, we always start with a needs analysis. So we decide who are our students and what are the personas of that program or of that group. In terms of occupational therapy, the best thing we could do for them was to give them a standard template that said, we will help you, we will scaffold this all the way through. You worried about building your content and making it perfect, and we'll help you put it in the course site and get it professional and ready for dissertation. But we also have programs that are, one of our programs is video game designing. So those people want full creative control over their web publishing sites. And that we'd come to that knowledge having done a needs analysis of who are our students. Because we can't, one shoe does not fit all, it just definitely doesn't. Size shoe. Yes.
This actually relates to this last question. Firstly, how do you do training with Sidekick and Lambda.com? And then with that training, How do you ensure accessibility for all of those individualized sites?
That's a great question.
Well, what we do, it kind of goes back to our self-service. People are able to come to us to get help, but because he's asking about training for Linda or for a sidekick. Actually, those are intended to give people their own self-training. We sort of set them free to do that, and we can meet with people to give them a little bit of help. But again, we're a global university, and we can meet with the New York City crowd, but we can't just meet with the Abu Dhabi crowd, just like, oh, come to the office today. And so that's why we have those services there we can communicate with them and say, to learn more, go there. And I guess probably the biggest example of, how we've been able to use scalability is this template example. And that's been one of our biggest projects. That's why we spent a lot of time talking about that particular use case, is because that was a big project where we said, we're overwhelmed and we can't really just build sites for people. So we need to give that power to the groups who can build their own sites and just take it and run. And so that's what they've been able to do.
Sorry,
Accessibility.
Yeah, for accessibility. Because part of it is our terms of use. We ask the site owners and the site creators to make their sites accessible, and we expect that of them. We've given them access to an accessibility plugin, which adds some of those features and sort of pushes them to make it more accessible. But beyond that, we're trying to figure out how to make it better. So
and if the Office of Civil Rights is listening right now, we're working on it. We're working on it. But there was one quick.
Yeah, my question with Eportfolios, I would assume part of it is curricular, is the need. But part of it might be for getting jobs.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
obviously, you don't want to keep a site up forever. The students graduate. Do you have training to help them export it, to manage this? Is something that they
Wonderful question.
That kind of rolls into when we downsize, we do encourage people to use WordPress's good old export. You're going to have to take, this is why we use WordPress, is so that you're not just using a system that you're never going to have a way to use after you graduate. Use WordPress. You can set up a WordPress outside of school. If you had such a great portfolio, you can keep all your content is yours. That's in our little terms of service. Your content is your intellectual property, and so they're able to take that on export. Yeah.
Well, how about Dan?